What Scott said about the U.S. having the most, quote-unquote, progressive tax system, it's not that the Europeans tax the rich less; it's that they tax the poor and middle class more. Their income taxes take effect at lower levels. They have these value-added taxes, and they tend to have, it varies by country, of course, they tend to have higher payroll taxes. So the U.S. and the Europeans, roughly similar ways of taxing the rich. But the Europeans tax the heck out of middle class and poor people, and that's why their aggregate tax burdens are so much higher. What's been said already about the most damaging taxes, I fully agree. The high corporate and personal income tax rates are very bad, but also you get some very interesting details when you look at the sort of subcomponents of the different tax systems. For instance, the fact that we have depreciation of investment instead of full expensing, as Steve can tell you ad nauseum, that's a very destructive policy. And having a death tax sort of locked onto the individual income tax on a per dollar basis is very, very destructive. To sort of wrap up a lot of all that's been said, you can raise $1 and do this much damage, or you can raise $1 and do this much damage. And unfortunately, with our tax system, arguably, we have the most damaging on a per dollar basis tax system in the industrialized world. Sweden might collect more, but they do it in a less destructive fashion on a per dollar, or for them per kroner basis. The other thing I want to say about the overall economy, one thing that might be very interesting, especially for members, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, right on their homepage, has a great interactive feature where you can compare business cycles ever since World War II. This is the weakest recovery, both in terms of GDP and employment, since going all the way back to the Great Depression. It's not like you're quoting CATO or Heritage or the Tax Foundation. It's very hard for a journalist to say somehow that's biased data. So I think that's very useful. The one last thing I would say is, in the long run, it's very hard to have good tax policy if you don't have good spending policy. And one of the things I've been doing at CATO is a lot of research comparing countries around the world, and countries like Canada in the 1990s or like Switzerland this century that managed to somehow cap the growth of spending. In a libertarian fantasy world, we'd actually do cutting. But as long as you're holding government spending so it grows slower than the private sector, and you sustain that over time, you get very, very good results in terms of the burden of government spending falling as a share of GDP, and that makes good tax policy a lot more feasible, especially when we're dealing with the disadvantage of the Joint Committee on Taxation doing static scoring and things like that. So some of the internal procedures are biased against us. So spending restraint definitely makes our job easier if we can do it and maintain it.